I didn't find out Megan cheated in a dramatic way. No screaming match. No shattered phone on the wall. Just a quiet realization that settled into my chest and refused to leave. In a small town, you learn quickly that nothing stays hidden for long. People don't have to tell you things outright. They just stop meeting your eyes. Megan and I had been together almost 2 years. I was 25, she was 24, and we'd grown into that dangerous comfort where you assume stability means safety. We had routines. Friday takeout. Sunday mornings half asleep on the couch. Long talks about leaving this town someday, even though neither of us had taken a real step toward it. I trusted her. Completely. That's important to say, because it explains why I ignored the early signs. She started coming home later, dressing with more intention, laughing at messages she never shared. When I asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off like I was being insecure. In a way, she was right. I was insecure, but not without reason. The night it finally clicked, I was alone in my apartment, scrolling mindlessly. I wasn't looking for proof. I think that's what made it hurt more when I found it. A photo popped up on social media, not even posted by Megan. Someone from town I barely knew. A group at a bar about 30 minutes away. Megan was there, smiling the way she used to smile at me. Her hand was on another guy's arm. Not casually. Not accidentally. Familiar. I stared at that photo longer than I want to admit, trying to invent explanations. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it meant nothing. But deep down I knew. In this town, people don't touch each other like that unless something's already crossed a line. When Megan came home that night, she smelled like alcohol and somewhere new. I didn't say anything. I lay awake next to her, listening to her breathing, wondering how long she'd been living a separate life right beside me. The truth didn't come out all at once. It leaked. Through awkward pauses when I walked into rooms. Through conversations that stopped mid-sentence. People knew. That was the worst part. Realizing I was the last one to understand my own relationship. When I finally confronted her, she didn't deny it. She didn't cry either. She said it wasn't planned. As if that softened the blow. I ended things that night. Cleanly, at least on the surface. But breaking up in a small town doesn't mean separation. It means constant reminders. I still saw Megan at the grocery store. At intersections. In reflections I wasn't ready for. I started going out more just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. That's how I met Natalie. It wasn't romantic at first. It wasn't even intentional. She worked at a place I started visiting because it was quiet and anonymous. Natalie was 35, older, calm, observant. She had a way of listening that made you feel like your words actually landed somewhere. She didn't ask about Megan. Didn't pry. She just noticed when I lingered longer than necessary, when I sat with my coffee untouched. Eventually, I talked. Not all at once. Just pieces. Natalie didn't offer advice. She didn't say, everything happens for a reason. She just listened, and that made me feel more seen than I had in months. At the time, I thought she was just someone who understood. I didn't know yet that meeting her would change the direction of everything that came next. At first, Natalie was just part of a routine I didn't question. I'd stop by after work, order the same thing, sit in the same corner. She never rushed me, never filled the silence just to make it disappear. In a town where everyone felt entitled to know your business, that restraint mattered. Over time, she started remembering small things. How I took my coffee, that I hated talking about my job, that I paused before answering questions that got too close. She noticed patterns without pointing them out, and somehow that made me open up more. I told her about Megan in fragments. Not the whole story, just enough to bleed the pressure off. Natalie listened the way older people sometimes do, not impatient, not judgmental, just curious in a quiet, precise way. When I finished one night, I waited for her to say something comforting. She didn't. Instead, she asked, "Do you feel stupid, or do you feel angry?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it longer than I should have. Both, I said, but mostly stupid. She nodded once. That makes sense, but it won't last. I didn't ask how she knew. We started talking more after that. Not just when she was working. Sometimes she'd sit with me during breaks. Sometimes we'd walk outside when the place closed. The conversations shifted slowly, from my breakup to her life, her past, the way she talked about relationships like they were systems, not fairy tales. Natalie had been married once. Divorced now. No bitterness in her voice when she said it, just clarity. She talked about patterns people repeat because they mistake intensity for connection. About how small towns magnify mistakes until they feel permanent. You don't disappear here, she said one night. You just get redefined. I started noticing how people looked at us when we talked. Nothing obvious. Just curiosity. Natalie noticed it too. She didn't seem bothered. Megan noticed as well. The first time she saw me with Natalie, it was unintentional. A coincidence at the grocery store. Megan froze for half a second, not long enough to be polite, but long enough to register surprise. Her eyes moved between us, measuring something. Later that night, she texted me for the first time since we broke up. Didn't know you were into older women now. I stared at the message longer than I should have. It wasn't anger I felt. It was satisfaction, quiet, restrained, unfamiliar. I didn't reply. When I told Natalie about it, she smiled slightly. Not amused. Not smug. Just aware. She's uncomfortable, Natalie said. That's not nothing. Something shifted between us after that. Not physically, not yet, but in tone. Our conversations grew sharper, more deliberate. Natalie asked questions that forced me to examine things I tried to rush past. Why I'd stayed when I felt neglected. Why I'd ignored signs. Why Megan's betrayal felt like a public failure, not just a private one. She didn't validate my anger blindly. She redirected it. Revenge isn't about hurting someone, she said once. It's about control. Most people do it badly. I asked her if she was speaking from experience. She met my eyes and said, yes. That was the first time I wondered how much of Natalie's calm was earned the hard way. The town started whispering. Not loudly, just enough for me to notice the shift. Megan's version of events had clearly traveled faster than the truth. I was painted as the one who moved on too fast. Natalie warned me not to correct it. Let them think what they want, she said. Perception always collapses under its own weight. I didn't know then how literal that would become. All I knew was that for the first time since Megan cheated, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was paying attention. People assume attraction announces itself loudly, that it crashes into your life with urgency and heat. What happened with Natalie was quieter than that, and because of that, more dangerous. By the time I realized I was thinking about her outside our conversations, it was already too late. Not in a dramatic, romantic way. Just small intrusions. Wondering what she'd think about something. Hearing her voice in my head when I second-guessed myself. We didn't cross any obvious lines at first. No flirting anyone could point at. No touches that lingered too long. If anything, that restraint intensified everything. Natalie noticed it before I did. One evening, after we'd closed up and were walking toward our cars, she stopped and looked at me like she was recalculating something. You're different lately, she said. I shrugged. Different how? More deliberate, she replied. Less apologetic. I didn't know whether to take that as a compliment. She continued, Megan didn't just cheat on you. She destabilized you. That's why this still matters. That word, matters, stuck with me. A few days later, Megan showed up at the place Natalie worked. Not accidentally. She lingered too long, spoke too loudly, laughed in a way that felt practiced. She pretended not to notice Natalie at first, then acted overly polite once she did. Natalie remained calm, professional, unbothered. But when Megan left, Natalie leaned against the counter and exhaled slowly. She's trying to reclaim narrative, she said. I asked what that meant. She needs to believe she still affects you, Natalie explained. Seeing you stable, or worse, improved, threatens that. I thought about Megan's text. Her tone. The way she tried to reduce Natalie to a joke. For the first time, I didn't feel defensive. I felt curious. What do you do when someone does that? I asked. Natalie smiled faintly. You don't stop them. You let them overextend. The town's social gravity pulled everything closer together. Rumors evolved. Versions of the story changed depending on who was telling it. Megan's version painted her as confused, lonely, and brave enough to tell the truth. I was framed as bitter, replaced, unstable. I wanted to defend myself. Natalie advised against it. Silence is unnerving to people who rely on reaction, she said, especially in places like this. Our relationship shifted again that night. Not physically, but emotionally. She invited me to her place, not for anything dramatic, just to talk without interruptions. Her house was neat but lived in. Books everywhere. No photos of exes. No obvious clues about her past. It felt intentional. We talked for hours. About her divorce. About how she learned to stop explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. About how revenge, when done properly, rarely looks like revenge. I asked her if that was what she was helping me with. Natalie didn't answer immediately. She poured another glass of wine, handed it to me, then said, "I'm helping you regain authorship. What you do with that is your choice." The tension between us finally surfaced, not in touch, but in proximity, sitting closer than necessary. Pauses that lasted a second too long. A shared understanding that something was unfolding. When I left that night, Megan texted again. "Everyone says you're different now." I smiled at my phone. Because for the first time, I knew it was true. Change doesn't announce itself all at once. It settles into habits, into posture, into the way you stop explaining your choices to people who never listened in the first place. Natalie became part of my life in a way that felt intentional rather than impulsive. We didn't label anything. We didn't need to. The absence of definition gave us room to breathe and to observe. She taught me how to watch people without assuming the best or worst of them, how to listen for what wasn't being said. In a small town, she explained, people perform versions of themselves constantly, adjusting depending on who's watching. "Megan is performing right now," Natalie said one evening. "She just doesn't know for whom." Megan's behavior shifted noticeably. She stopped pretending indifference and started leaning into visibility. New posts, new stories, carefully framed happiness. The guy she'd cheated with appeared more often, always positioned just right, close enough to imply intimacy, distant enough to look casual. It wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed at me. I would have taken the bait months ago. Now, I didn't react at all. That unnerved her. We ran into Megan at a local fundraiser a week later. One of those events everyone attends because not attending is its own statement. Natalie and I arrived separately, by design. She blended into the crowd effortlessly. I stayed near the back. Megan noticed Natalie before she noticed me. Her posture shifted. Her smile stiffened. She watched Natalie the way people watch a threat they don't yet understand. Later, Megan approached me. "Alone. You seem fine," she said, scanning my face like she was searching for cracks. "I am," I replied. She nodded slowly. "Good. I worried you were taking things hard." Natalie watched from across the room, expression neutral. Megan leaned in slightly. "So what's the deal with her?" I shrugged. "There's no deal." That was true, and it bothered Megan more than any lie would have. She laughed lightly, but her eyes stayed sharp. "She's a little old for you, don't you think?" I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Later that night, Natalie and I talked about it over dinner at her place. She listened carefully, then asked one question. "Did she ask about you?" Natalie said. "Or about her position in your life?" I didn't need time to answer. Natalie nodded. "Good. Then we're right on schedule." That word again, the plan, if you could call it that, was never outlined in steps. Natalie didn't believe in rigid schemes. She believed in pressure and patience, letting people reveal themselves by removing obstacles. In Megan's case, the obstacle had always been my attention. Without it, she started reaching. She texted more frequently. Not directly confrontational, just familiar, nostalgic. She sent old photos, inside jokes, reminders of a version of us that no longer existed. I showed Natalie everything. "She's not trying to get you back," Natalie said. "She's trying to restore balance. You moved on without permission." That night, something finally crossed from implied to acknowledged between Natalie and me. We didn't rush it. There was no dramatic confession, just a quiet moment where distance disappeared and neither of us pretended not to notice. It was restrained, intentional, charged without being reckless. Afterward, Natalie rested her head against my shoulder and said, "Now comes the part where she notices the difference." I asked how. Natalie smiled faintly. "Because people always sense when they've lost leverage." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And in this town, that was far more dangerous than anger. The first real mistake Megan made was assuming silence meant confusion. She started testing boundaries more aggressively after that fundraiser. Casual run-ins became intentional. She showed up at places she knew I'd be, always with plausible deniability, always with that same rehearsed surprise. "Oh, hey, didn't know you'd be here." I never lingered, never explained. I acknowledged her existence the way you acknowledge weather, briefly, without emotion. Natalie noticed everything. "She's escalating," she said. "That means the pressure is working." I asked what came next. Natalie considered me for a moment. "Nothing. Yet." That was the hardest part. Doing nothing when instinct tells you to act. But restraint, Natalie explained, creates space. And in that space, people tend to overcorrect. Megan's relationship with the guy she cheated with started appearing less polished. Fewer photos, more vague captions, the kind that tried to sell happiness instead of showing it. In a town like ours, people noticed the shift even if they didn't talk about it openly. Then the questions started. Not directly to me. Through friends. Through acquaintances who pretended curiosity was concern. Are you really seeing someone older? Is it serious? Does Megan know? Natalie advised me to answer simply. No elaboration. No defensiveness. Yes. I'm happy. I'm not discussing Megan. Consistency unsettles people who rely on chaos. The real turning point came when Megan reached out to Natalie. She didn't know Natalie and I were close, not officially. From Megan's perspective, Natalie was just an older woman I'd been seen with. A variable she didn't control. The message was polite, almost friendly. Megan framed it as concern. I just wanted to make sure there's nothing weird going on. Ryan's been through a lot. Natalie showed me the message without comment. Do you want me to respond? Natalie asked. I hesitated. Should you? Natalie smiled slightly. Only if we're precise. She replied hours later. Calm. Neutral. Unemotional. Ryan is doing well. I appreciate your concern. That was it. No reassurance. No explanation. No invitation. Megan didn't respond. But the effect was immediate. She started spiraling. Not publicly, but socially. Asking mutual friends questions that revealed more insecurity than she intended. Trying to reframe the breakup in conversations where it didn't belong. Subtly undermining herself. Natalie called it self-exposure. When someone is desperate to control the story, she said, they forget to stay consistent. The town began to shift. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. Megan's narrative lost cohesion. People started noticing contradictions. Timelines that didn't add up. Emotional reactions that didn't match the situation. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. One evening, Megan confronted me directly. No audience. No performance. You think you're better than me now? She asked. I looked at her and realized something surprising. I didn't feel anything sharp. No, I said. I just stopped waiting for you to decide who I am. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. That woman changed you, she said. I didn't deny it. Later, Natalie and I talked about the confrontation. I expected her to be pleased. She wasn't. She's not finished, Natalie said. This was about validation, not closure. I asked how she knew. Because she didn't apologize, Natalie replied. And she didn't ask how you were. That night, Natalie warned me that the final phase wouldn't look dramatic. No explosion. No confession. It will be quiet, she said. And by the time it's over, she won't be angry at you anymore. I asked who she would be angry at. Natalie met my eyes. Herself. The town didn't turn on Megan overnight. It never does. Small places prefer erosion to collapse. What changed first was tone. Conversations about her became shorter. Less sympathetic. People stopped defending her automatically. When her name came up, there was a pause, just long enough to signal doubt. Natalie called it the moment credibility starts to drain. Megan felt it too. She started showing up alone more often. The guy she'd cheated with faded from the picture without explanation. No announcement. No breakup post. Just absence. In a town obsessed with continuity, that absence spoke louder than any confession. Megan tried to reinsert herself into my life one last time. Not romantically. Strategically. She asked to meet, to clear the air. Natalie and I talked it through. She didn't tell me what to do. She asked what outcome I wanted. I don't want to feel reactive anymore, I said. I don't want this to control me. Natalie nodded. Then meet her. But don't give her anything she can reshape. We met in public. Neutral ground. Midday. No alcohol. No nostalgia. Megan looked tired. Not in a dramatic way, just worn around the edges. She tried to smile, but it didn't land. I think we both handled things badly, she began. I waited. She filled the silence quickly. I never meant to hurt you. I was just confused. And then everyone turned it into something it wasn't. There it was. No apology. Just reframing. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her timeline. I didn't defend myself. I'm not interested in rehashing it, I said. I've moved on. She flinched slightly at that. With her? Megan asked. With my life, I replied. That distinction mattered. Megan leaned back, studying me like she was trying to locate a familiar version. You don't seem angry, she said. I'm not, I answered. I was. I'm not anymore. That was the moment something in her collapsed, because anger would have kept her relevant. She left shortly after. No dramatic exit, just quiet withdrawal. Natalie listened when I told her how it went. She didn't celebrate. That was the last time she'll try to control the narrative through you, she said. What happens next will be indirect. Indirect turned out to mean exposure. Megan's inconsistencies caught up with her socially. Stories she'd told in confidence didn't align when compared. People noticed how often she positioned herself as the victim, even in situations she'd initiated. No one accused her outright. They just stopped offering unquestioned support. One afternoon, I heard she'd taken time off work. Not announced, not explained, just stepped back. In this town, stepping back is often an admission without words. Natalie and I grew closer in the aftermath, not in intensity, but in stability. Our relationship never felt like a reaction to Megan anymore. It felt like its own ecosystem. One night, I asked Natalie why she'd been willing to help me. She thought for a long time before answering. Because I recognize the moment when someone is about to define themselves by someone else's betrayal, she said. And I've done that before. I asked if she regretted her own revenge. Natalie shook her head. I regretted needing it, not understanding it. Megan moved shortly after. Not far, just far enough to reset perception. No goodbye posts. No closure speech. Just disappearance. The town filled in the blanks on its own. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt finished. And that, Natalie said, was the point. Once Megan left town, I realized how much space she'd been occupying without my consent. Not physically, emotionally, mentally. Even when I wasn't thinking about her, I was reacting to the echo of what she'd done. Her absence made that obvious. The town adjusted faster than I expected. New topics replaced old ones. New dramas took priority. In small places, memory is selective. People remember what stays visible. Natalie and I never talked about Megan anymore unless it was necessary. Not out of avoidance, but irrelevance. The story had run its course. What remained was us. Our relationship settled into something that didn't need constant intensity to feel real. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic labels, just a steady rhythm built on clarity and choice. That difference mattered. Natalie didn't compete with my past. She didn't ask me to rewrite it. She treated it like a completed chapter, one that didn't need footnotes. One night, sitting on her porch, she said something that stuck with me. Most people think revenge is about punishment, she said. It's not. It's about restoration. You take back what was distorted. I asked if she thought we'd crossed a line. Natalie considered the question seriously. We didn't lie. We didn't harm anyone directly. We let patterns finish themselves. That answer felt true, but also unsettling, because it meant Megan's consequences weren't something we'd inflicted. They were something she'd accelerated. The town saw her departure as a quiet resolution. No one asked me for details. No one needed them. The absence of noise was enough. What surprised me most was how people started treating me differently. With respect I hadn't realized I'd lost. With curiosity that wasn't invasive. Natalie noticed it too. You're not being defined by reaction anymore, she said. You're being read as stable. Stability, I learned, carries its own authority. There were moments, brief ones, where I wondered if I'd been manipulated. If Natalie had guided things too precisely. If I'd mistaken strategy for connection. I asked her directly. She didn't get defensive. If you'd wanted chaos, she said, you wouldn't have listened to me. And if I'd wanted control, I wouldn't have left you choices. That answer satisfied me. We talked about the future in ways that felt grounded rather than aspirational. No escape fantasies. No dramatic exits. Just possibilities. Adjustments. Timing. Natalie never tried to replace anything. She added. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Megan's old friend. She hesitated before speaking. I think she thought you'd come back eventually, she said. I didn't feel flattered. Or vindicated. I felt distant. That distance was freedom. Natalie and I eventually stopped hiding our relationship. Not because we were afraid, but because secrecy no longer served a purpose. No one reacted strongly. The age gap raised eyebrows, then faded into normalcy. People adapt. That night, Natalie asked me if I'd do anything differently. I thought about it carefully. I wouldn't rush healing just to feel powerful, I said. I'd let it take the time it takes. Natalie smiled. That's how you know you're done. As the town moved on, so did I. Not dramatically, not symbolically, just quietly. And for the first time, quiet felt like a choice, not a consequence. Time has a way of flattening intensity. What once felt sharp becomes smooth, not because it disappears, but because you stop pressing on it. By the time fall settled in, Megan felt like a story someone else had told me. Familiar, but distant. Natalie and I had built something that didn't depend on contrast. There was no before version she was competing with. Just what we were choosing now. That was new for me. Our relationship wasn't loud. It didn't demand validation. It unfolded through consistency, shared meals, conversations that deepened instead of looping, silences that felt intentional rather than awkward. Natalie challenged me without destabilizing me. She didn't frame growth as punishment for past mistakes. She framed it as responsibility. One evening, she asked me a question that surprised me. If Megan came back tomorrow, she said, and apologized sincerely, would it change anything? I didn't answer right away. No, I said finally. It would explain things, but it wouldn't reopen them. Natalie nodded. That's closure. I realized then that revenge had stopped being part of the equation a long time ago. What remained was alignment, with myself, with my values, with the way I wanted to show up. The town continued to do what towns do. It absorbed the story and moved on. Megan's name came up less often, and when it did, it carried no charge. One afternoon, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. I heard you're doing well. I'm glad. No name. No signature. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of certainty. I told Natalie about it that night. She didn't ask who it was from. She already knew. That message wasn't for you, she said. It was for her. I understood what she meant. We talked about power, not the loud kind, but the kind that comes from not needing resolution from someone else. Natalie said most people confuse forgiveness with access. You can release someone, she said, without letting them back into your life. That distinction felt important. I started thinking about how close I'd come to defining myself by what Megan did to me. How easy it would have been to stay there. Angry, reactive, predictable. Natalie didn't rescue me from that. She interrupted it. Our age difference stopped feeling like a factor. Not because it disappeared, but because it no longer carried imbalance. We met each other where we were, not where we'd been. One night, as we sat together watching the town settle into darkness, Natalie said something quietly. You didn't need revenge, she said. You needed perspective. I thought about everything that had happened. The silence. The restraint. The way consequences unfolded without force. You gave me that, I said. Natalie shook her head. You chose it. That was the truth. The story people remembered wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about transition. About someone who didn't spiral. Someone who didn't beg for narrative control. Someone who changed. And in a town where change is rare, that becomes its own conclusion. Perspective doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in layers, revealing itself when you stop searching for it. By winter, my life felt structurally different. Not improved in some dramatic, cinematic way, just quieter, more deliberate. The chaos that had once felt inevitable now seemed optional. Natalie noticed it before I articulated it. You're not scanning rooms anymore, she said one evening. You're present. She was right. I wasn't looking for reactions. I wasn't measuring absence or impact. I wasn't waiting for echoes of Megan's choices to confirm my worth. That freedom felt unfamiliar at first, then addictive. We talked about moving, not as an escape, but as a choice. Maybe someday, maybe not. For the first time, staying didn't feel like stagnation. One afternoon, I ran into someone who had known Megan well. We exchanged polite conversation, then an awkward pause. She talked about you for a long time after she left, the person said carefully. I waited. She didn't understand how she lost everything without you doing anything. That sentence stayed with me, because it was true. There was no confrontation, no exposure post, no public reckoning, just absence of reaction. And in that absence, clarity emerged. Natalie and I discussed it later. That's the hardest lesson for people like her, Natalie said. That they're not always opposed. Sometimes they're just irrelevant. I asked Natalie if she'd ever worried about becoming the villain in someone else's story. She smiled faintly. Villains are only necessary when someone needs justification. That answer felt complete. Our relationship deepened, not through intensity, but through trust. I trusted her insight. She trusted my restraint. Neither of us needed to test boundaries to feel secure. Natalie never positioned herself as my savior. That mattered. She didn't replace Megan. She existed independently of that chapter. I realized something important then. The revenge people imagine is loud because it's insecure. The quiet kind requires certainty. One night, I asked Natalie if she thought Megan would ever truly understand what happened. Natalie didn't answer immediately. No, she said finally. Understanding requires accountability. She wanted explanation without responsibility. That distinction mattered. The town eventually absorbed my story into its background noise. I became the guy who moved on well. Not dramatically, just well. That reputation followed me in subtle ways. In opportunities. In respect. In the way conversations shifted when I spoke. Natalie watched it unfold with mild amusement. Stability is threatening to people who rely on volatility, she said. I didn't feel superior. I felt finished. One night, as winter edged toward spring, Natalie asked me a question I hadn't anticipated. If this story ended here, she said, would you be satisfied? I thought carefully. Yes, I said. Because it's not a story anymore. It's just my life. She smiled. Good. That means you're ready for the ending. At the time, I didn't know what she meant. I would soon. Endings rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, disguised as normal days. Spring came without ceremony. The town looked the same, but it felt different to me, not because it had changed, but because I had. I moved through it without tension, without expectation. I no longer anticipated reminders of Megan or reactions to Natalie. I wasn't measuring myself against anything. Natalie noticed before I did. You're done carrying it, she said one morning, matter-of-factly. She was right. Megan never came back. Not physically, not emotionally. Whatever version of me she had expected to find, angry, waiting, resentful, no longer existed. And without that mirror, there was nothing left for her to push against. That was the final consequence. Natalie and I stood at a crossroads that didn't require urgency. We talked honestly about the future, about what staying together would mean, about what it would cost. There were no promises made out of fear, only agreements made out of clarity. For the first time, a relationship felt like a choice rather than a reaction. I thought back to the night I first realized Megan had cheated. The confusion, the humiliation, the sense that something had been taken from me publicly. At the time, I thought I needed justice. What I needed was authorship. Natalie never gave me revenge. She gave me perspective and the discipline to let people reveal themselves fully. In the end, Megan wasn't destroyed. She wasn't exposed in some dramatic reckoning. She simply lost relevance in a story she thought she was still writing. That was the part she never anticipated. And maybe that's the most uncomfortable outcome of all, realizing you're no longer important to someone you assumed would always orbit you. Natalie once told me that real power doesn't look like victory. It looks like indifference. Standing there, watching another ordinary day unfold, I understood what she meant. If there's anything I learned from all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't end a story, reaction does. And when you remove reaction, what's left is choice. I chose not to become smaller. I chose not to become louder. I chose not to let someone else's lack of integrity define the shape of my life. This isn't a story about revenge, not really. It's a story about restraint, about patience, about letting time do the work anger insists on rushing. And if Megan ever wonders how she lost me without a fight, the answer is simple. I stopped playing a role in a story that no longer needed me. That's how it ended. Quietly. Exactly the way it needed to.